Hi, everyone. Okay, so today we have our guest, the man that doesn't need any introductions, Phil Mooney. Hi, Phil. How are you doing today?
Hi, Olena.
Good. Okay, so my podcast is for RCICs. Usually I post this on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and majority of my listeners are RCICs. Sometimes it's some immigration lawyers as well. Usually we talk a lot about business and just any really immigration related topics. You've been in business for a long time. When did you start?
Well, business-wise, I started a long time ago. I spent 30 years in the corporate world. And then after that, after all that time, I ended up in a pretty senior position. And then there was a reshuffle, and I got the chance to do other things. So it's now it's over 25 years ago that I got into immigration. People say, well, why did you do that? I had opportunities to go work with different companies, and I used to travel a lot around the world. Um, but I had a chance to go into this immigration, and people said, why did you do immigration? I said, it's because I was looking for a job, basically. Okay. I, I had to have a job to help support the family. And someone offered me the chance to set up a little, like almost like a franchise operation for a company in Quebec that did U.S. immigration,
Mhm.
and they were looking for clients outside Quebec, and their English wasn't so great. So I actually set up an office and got started in the business that way. And as I learned more and more about U.S. immigration, I started getting calls about Canadian immigration, and I didn't want to waste them. So I convinced the company to hire a Canadian immigration lawyer, and who I could work with and bring clients for as well. And this is all before regulation. Okay, so there
Yep.
was basically no entry fee, no classes to take, no exams to pass. It was just the Wild West, if you will. But after a couple of years, the manga decision changed everything, and said that immigration consultants could practice immigration, but they had to be regulated. So around 2004, 2005, we started hearing about all of this, and I joined KPIC because I wanted to understand the process better, and because while I was doing more and more Canadian immigration, I had lots of ideas. And I kept writing a note to sending in a letter to immigration, thinking that someone would read it and answer me, which was of course foolish. Okay, so I joined K because they said, "Well, we lobby the government," and I know I was at my first meeting, and I wasn't. I'd been in the corporate world for 30 years in corporate marketing and sales, and I knew how to do presentations and all that. And at the first meeting, I wasn't terribly impressed with the organization, and I mentioned it to a guy sitting next to me. He says, "Well, instead of whining and complaining, why don't you get involved?" So I volunteered, and 5 years later, after basically a full-time job of getting organized with KPIC and then fighting off our first regulator, um, it turned out to be a more than full-time job. But in along the way, I met lots of great people. Um, I got lucky in that because I was involved with KPIC, and I knew something about Canadian immigration, they volunteered me to be an exam writer, a question writer. I
Mhm.
never had to write the first exam, okay, because I wrote most of the questions.
Haha, really? I didn't know about that. Wow. So
Yeah,
which year was the
that
first
was
exam?
2006 when we became regulated, and then to become regulated and to join by 2006, you had to take a full skills exam, and it was very similar to what we have now, because they
Mhm.
did a very good job at setting up the exam and the registration process. There was a lot of other things they didn't do, but because I wrote many of the questions on the exam, it didn't make sense to take it. So I became a member in 2006 in April, like the first cohort, if you will. Um, and we all started practicing immigration. But after about a year or so, we found out that our regulator was not the right regulator. The people involved were, they overestimated the number of people who were joining, and
Mhm.
they were extremely heavy-handed. So we all complained. The one good thing about being an advocate is you get to complain, and people don't call it complaining; they call it advocacy. Okay? So we got to fight through the with our regulator, and it was tough. Before, as head of KPIC for about 3 years, it was my job to basically lead the fight and to deal with the government and to lobby them to help bring it to their attention the fact that we were we were all paying something like $7,000 and $8,000 a year just to be a member. Okay, and that was because we were forced to take education classes through the regulatory body.
Yep.
The classes were really poor, very expensive. We had things like our errors and emissions insurance were basically triple, even what they are today. So there was a lot of problems, and we had a big team, and we fought, very hard. And luckily, by 2010, we convinced the government something was seriously wrong, and so they put the regulatory process of the regulatory body. The minister couldn't even cancel it. He didn't have the authority to cancel it, so he put it out to bid. And
Hmm.
KPIC put in a bid that I was happy to work with. We had a small team of Chris Daw and oh my goodness, at my age, memory starts to fail. Lynn Godet. We were sort of the steering committee, and then we had about 50 or 70 volunteers from
Oh,
KPIC,
wow.
and they all put together the business plan and the bid, and we won. And
Hmm.
so all of a sudden, in early 2011, the government came to us and said, "Okay, what are you going to do?" So we had to basically put an implementation plan together, and in basically because we won, but we couldn't say anything. And
Hmm.
then we did, and a few weeks later, they announced it, and we had a couple of months to get ready. And on July 1st of 2011, ICCRC started up, and we tried to do everything that we needed to be regulated. Um, but the previous regulator would set the rules, but they didn't do much of anything about it.
Yep.
They said you had to have a client account, but they didn't tell you what to do with it. They said you
Hmm.
had to have a service agreement, or now we call them service agreements. They didn't tell you what should be in it. All they would do is, if they ever didn't like something you were doing, is they would use any reason to basically persecute you, and they did. So that ended July 1st, 2011, and we got a huge gift from the government because when Mangat decision was formed, first they said you had to be regulated, and then when our first regulator was started, the rules there, the government in ERPA put in the rule that said was it? Representation only starts after an application is filed. So if you
Hmm.
can imagine, if somebody, a ghost consultant out there, could meet with people openly, could offer to provide immigration advice for a fee, could fill in their forms for them, and
Yep.
only after it was submitted, or only once it was like an appeal was submitted to IED or whatever, only then did you have to be an RCIC or a lawyer to be able to work. And that created, of course, lots of problems for everybody. But in July of 2011, the government changed ERPA and said, now, even if you offer to provide advice for a fee, or if you offer to
Hmm.
do services, you must be a consultant. So that was a big gift, number one. Then they were really good because they said consultants had suffered for so many years with the high fees, etc. They announced that from July until December, nobody had to pay any fees, which, when we were setting up the regulatory body and we were hiring people and getting ready to go, that took away a third of our budget. Okay.
Yeah. That
And,
that
and
was a problem.
oh yes, I called a minister and I said, "You just bankrupted us." And he said, "What?"
Yeah.
Now they had lent us some money. There was no grant or anything else.
Hmm.
But we managed to get through it with a huge help from volunteers. And there are a whole lot of people that got involved in the process. And we got our offices set up, and we got not even a single piece of paper from the previous regulator, not a complaint file, nothing, not
Hmm.
even phone numbers or email addresses or anything. But we managed to register, I think, in the first few, well, by the time we were set to go, about 1,800 RCICs, and virtually 95% or 99% of those who were there before, and set in all the rules that we have today. And now we have a different, we also then became, in 2019, we got them to, pass the College Act. So I was the first CEO of ICCRC, but I had been in the corporate world for a long time, and we got it all set up and running. We hired all the people, but I said, it's not what I want to do with my life. I'm now, by then I was, getting very ready to retire. So I thought I would um, simply, just turn it over to the next group with the board and all of that stuff. And I did go back
Yeah.
on the board for a couple of years after the first year, because there's some issues I wanted to get involved with. And then my plan was to retire. And I had turned over all of my files, I think 2015, 16, to most, to some of the people I had worked with. But they kept coming back to me on business cases and saying,
Yep.
"Can you help with this?" And I thought, well, if I'm going to help with it, we may as well share the revenues. And I had 5 or 6 people I was helping do that with. And then I put out a little newsletter for those 5 or 6 people because I didn't want to have to repeat myself every time. My biggest problem
Oops.
is, oops, oh,
That
hello.
was my
Yeah,
camera
yeah.
flopping. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, one of my biggest, my wife tells us my weakness is when people call me, we talk, okay, and we like to talk. Um, and in immigration, there's always lots to talk about. So I decided I'd send a little newsletter, and after sending it out and doing a few more seminars, all of a sudden I had 300 people that were interested in co-counseling,
Wow.
and it probably started co-counseling with, by now it's like 50 or 60 individuals at any one time. We have co-counseling files, and I thought, well, this wasn't a very good retirement plan because I got busier than ever. And then a couple of years ago, I had a big discussion with my associate Peter Veres, and we set up IMMC3, which is to offer co-counseling services to not just business clients, but now to, study permits or the whole range of immigration services we can provide. And last summer we set up our website, and we're moving along slowly. But that's what we do now. Is the whole purpose behind IMMC3. I'll give my commercial now. Then I don't have to do it at the end. The purpose is to help people learn how to do a file, because when they finish school and they get out into practice, there's nobody to show them how to do anything, because most of us practice alone, so we
Yep.
can't have articling students. Okay. And what students and all the people that pass the program are very good at is passing exams. Okay. And unfortunately, I mean, it's been a long time since I was a student, but it was the same then. All you had to do is you wanted to do enough to pass your exam to get your degree, and then you
Yep.
would get on with the rest of your life. Well, unfortunately, in immigration, you get your exam, you pass your full skills exam, and you get your license. Now you're ready to practice, but you've never done anything, which means everything you learned in the past, probably you might remember, but you don't know how to do it all. So the college now has some mentoring programs, that help, but they still don't teach you how to deal with every situation.
Yep.
So co-counseling seeks to come in and say, okay, you have a client, you're not sure how to deal with them. The last thing you want to do is, after working so hard for 4 or 5 years, to become a consultant and to get business, because getting business is a skill all in its own. And you work hard and you get your name out there and people call you. But when they call you, they say, well, I want to come to Canada. That's all they say.
Yep.
Because they're not experts. And so you take them through the regular process, and you find out that, boy, they got a master's degree, their English is perfect, they have a good work experience, but they're 45. So, well, right away, an express entry. That's a problem.
Yep.
But they tell you they've got $2 million, okay, and they're interested in business immigration, or I mean, there are many different reasons why people come, and you might have been practicing for 10 years, and you've been doing LMIAs and work permits and working with big companies, and the business all of a sudden changes. But somebody calls you and said, "You did such a great job with me and my family, but we need, my friend needs help with a refugee case." And you thought, well, I like to get into refugees, but I don't know anything about it. Or, you become licensed as a refugee consultant now in these days. But the whole idea is somebody comes to you with a business that you don't know how to do. And you can either just give it away and waste all the time and energy you invested in your business, or you give us a call. We'll work together with you. It's the whole purpose is to teach you how to do the file yourself. Okay. So we don't take your client. I mean, it's your client, your referral lead, somebody who, if you do a good job for, is going to be a resource for you for the next 20 years. So you keep the client, you're in control of the client, you set the prices. We just share the fees that you've worked out with the client. And then you've got somebody who knows what they're doing with you every step of the way. And that's how our process is now working. And we have now 11 what I would call co-counsels, who are subject matter experts in virtually every immigration field. And people can go to our website at immc3.ca. And you can read all about the rest of it. Okay. But so with all of that, now my plan is to hopefully have that business go well. so that I can finally retire. Okay. I'm being honest about it. Uh, um,
Yep.
we all of us involved in the co-counseling field fully accept the responsibility we have, but also have a desire to help our fellow consultants because we've all been through this. And the people get to be subject matter experts by handling everything and having to learn it on their own. So
Yep.
having somebody to deal with is always a good idea.
Yeah, for sure. So in my experience, and I know we've talked about this previously, that one of the biggest just blocks that people have in terms of co-counseling is like the first step is really just having even that co-counseling agreement. So for example, like if I have as you said, refugee on my hands, and I'm thinking that, okay, strategically, maybe I should get into that part of business. So that would be the perfect first case for me to learn and to really get into that side of immigration. And let's just say I know somebody, RCIC, that is perfectly great with refugees. My first that block is just, okay, how do I even make a proper co-counseling agreement, like service agreement, that would actually address all of the responsibilities of both parties, like both RCICs, and just really facilitate that process. And the second problem is just a real life problem of how do we split up our responsibilities? How do we really not to create any conflicts or environment for possible conflicts between us, our CSCs, and potentially between the clients, because by the end of the day, it would hurt the client, right? So I think what's really great is that IMM C3 is really facilitates that process, really eliminating any possibilities of, gray areas or, any potential conflicts or anything like that. Because as I understand, you guys have formats for those agreements, right?
Yeah.
You guys developed those agreements to really like think it through, okay, how the process works, what party responsible for which side of the process.
Yeah, and I'll give you a few secrets. Okay. Over the
Yeah.
years, because I've been around a long time, I've worked with a lot of people. I've actually shared files and worked with them, and I've made mistakes.
Yep.
At one point, I thought giving somebody 10% of a file if they want my help with it, and I'll teach them how to do it was great, except nobody ever wanted it. That was way too big way too small a share. Or we've
Hmm.
had people come to us, and you probably have in your career, saying, "I've got a lot of business for you." Well,
Yeah.
it costs it. You have to have a reasonable sharing arrangement, and the simplest ones are the best. Okay, and technically, when I first, once I got into this after having been in business for a long time, and seeing that other things didn't work, I decided on a few things. First of all, keep it simple. We don't have an agreement. There is no legal agreement between the parties that specifies what you do and what I do. We have a code of conduct. The code of conduct says that if you and I agree on something, then we're held to that agreement. Okay. And simply because we have a code of conduct means we have to understand what ethics is. So because of that, we don't set up an agreement, that says, here's a co-counseling agreement. What we do is we say, here's how we work. And the terms are guidelines, and IMMC3 has the guidelines, but it's between the counsel and the co-counsel. Okay. The counsel is the one with the client. Okay. And the
Hmm.
co-counsel, it's between them where they set the fees, how they share the fees. And that's a private conversation they can have. I'm MC3 because we're the matchmaker and all this. We just want 10%.
It's like Tinder for
Yeah.
immigration consultants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now some things we learned along the way. First of all, the client has to stay with the person who brought them. Okay. In other words, the counsel who's looking for help, it's always their client. They're in charge of communication. You know, now the co-counsel can communicate with the client with your approval. You can be together on calls. If I'm on lots of calls with my fellow RCICs, and they like me to talk. Okay, so I do. All right. But the price is what we have a suggested price list because we find people tend to charge too little or underestimate the work.
Yeah.
But the final decision on what fee to charge, and people come to me and say, well, we've offered them this fee at this much, but they're asking for a bit of a discount, and I'd like to give it to them. Well, my number one answer is don't. Okay, because once you quote a fee, I have my own policies
Yeah.
and principles. I'll share that advice, but if they do, that's their decision. We just share what's left, okay?
Yeah.
And to keep it even simpler, if somebody says, "Here's the fee," and it's in U.S. dollars, and we share after the conversion and after wire
Mhm.
transfer fees and after everything. I don't want to be saying that, oh, it was a $5,000 fee and we split it 50-50, but then there was a $20 wire transfer fee and a $50 exchange rate, whatever. That I like to keep it really simple. It's
Yeah.
after whatever you deposit into your trust account for professional fees is what we share. Other fees we have nothing to do with. Okay, if you are helping a client with an incorporation on a business case or with translations or with other services, and you're taking money from the client and for your role in that, that's up to you. Okay, that's not an issue for us. It's we only want the professional fees, and we typically, depending on the kind of case, we split it roughly 50-50. Okay,
Hmm.
on the first one, and depending on how much you learn, the second one is typically then 25-75 for you. Okay. And if after two of them you say, I know how to do this, that's great. There's no release to sign, there's no obligation on anything. It's your decision. We have other consultants with busy practices, and especially on business immigration, they just don't have time to get into all the details, but they want the file done right. That we've worked 10, 20 files on, and we take a
Yeah.
lower share for each of the files going forward. It's entirely up to the RCIC. Okay. So now what we do bring to the table for our co-counsels are templates. We've now done virtually every kind of file. We've handled every kind of situation, and we're pretty good at other situations that might come up, like what's a risk. Well, we have a template for service agreements, for example, that lays out all the costs, but also lays out what isn't covered and what those costs are. So we recommend to people, don't put in you'll provide all the services until a decision, and then when the IRCC messes up and now we got to do a reconsideration, well, we put a fee for that into the service agreement that to advise a client those fees could be charged. Okay.
Yeah.
The same on a variety of other things. And the other thing, by doing this, we've also sourced people who can help. There are all kinds of different service providers that we look for sometimes when a client needs help on anything. We've actually got a section on our website with people that have advertised there. They can't pay us anything, okay, because we're not, as you and I are not allowed to take fees from third parties that you refer our clients to, right? That's a change from before when I first started doing this. But even then, I never charged the suppliers, because my purpose was with business immigration was to try and simplify the process as much as possible so the clients could make their decisions as quickly as possible. So basically we're increasing the velocity of files, okay? Because
Hmm.
business files are complex, and
Yeah.
some of them could take years. We'd rather they took months, okay?
Yeah.
So we've got
So
partners along the way.
So I get asked this a lot because, you mentioned business immigration because that's one of your specialities, right? So right now, like in 2025, does it make sense for an RCIC to get into that space and potentially get a co-counseling? Like which streams, in
Sure.
your opinion, like make sense for them? So people who listen, they understand that, okay, I need to look into these streams. Once I look into them and I get a client, I can go to IMMC3 to get that co-counseling.
Right. So the bottom line is, again, when your client calls and says, "I want to come to Canada," you're never sure what they're qualified for,
Yeah.
and as you take them through your own qualification process, you'll separate out the ones who really their only option is business immigration. Now you have to figure out, because there's 25 business immigration programs around the country, what's important in all of that. So the reason you would co-counsel would be, number one, to try and figure out what this client is qualified for. And for that, you need people that understand all of the business programs. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, and if you only understand one business program because you did a PNP for Saskatchewan, right, doesn't mean you're qualified to then tell them that that's the best program, because you don't know about Newfoundland, and you don't know about ICTs, and you don't know about C10s. You don't know about what all the other options are. And our responsibility, our ethical responsibility as consultants, is to get the best option for the client.
Yeah.
not the most expensive one or not just the one we promote, but it's to get the best one. Okay. So that's where you need help. And that's when you decide for help. Now, it doesn't cost any money to see if the help is what you need is available. Okay. And when you go to our website and it says, I have a prospect, that's what you need. We don't want to be talking to people just to teach them about business immigration, because if they aren't doing it, you're not going to learn. Or about any other thing. That's the same. If you're doing a refugee case, if you're doing an
Mhm.
agency case, you got to be there with a prospect. Okay. So that's the price of entry. And then, we explain how the program works. You fill in a question, you get your client, or you fill in a questionnaire for the client. And questionnaires are one of the tools we use to basically find people that aren't eligible for anything,
Mhm.
because sometimes there are many of them. Okay.
Yeah.
And at least then you can deal with the person correctly, professionally, and you can keep them as a referral source by giving them good advice. Like, you need to go back and learn French if you ever want to have enough points to immigrate to Canada. That sort of advice. So um, when someone gets that kind of a client, the idea is, and with business immigration, you need that questionnaire to get as much information as possible.
Mhm.
Then oftentimes this next step will be the co-counsel, and you would then meet with the client together on a Zoom call, or Google Meet or whichever, and just and give them the outlines. Okay. Now, if it's a consultation, I've never charged for consultations in my life. Okay. I just never did, but I know many of our my fellow RCCs do, and I respect that. That's their choice. Um, and if they co-counsel with me and we're on a consultation call and they want to charge for it, that's all theirs. Okay. I'm happy to participate, because my belief is if I can explain all the programs properly to a client,
Yeah.
they're going to deal with us. Okay. Because we're not in a really competitive business. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and clients appreciate learning about what their options are before they have to commit. And it's just a part of my sales process, if you will, and I believe in it, and it's worked well for me in the past. But again, depending on the market you're in, sometimes paid consultations are different. And the one
I think
caveat I'll
it's
say is,
really different if you are into business immigration versus if you are in, I don't know, like express entry study permits or whatever it may be.
yeah, and
Like that is
these
very
days, yep,
different.
these days there's an exception I would make, in that we have a million or more individuals who have been working in Canada, studying Canada, who are losing their status and are looking and are desperate for anything. And for those people, you need to do a full assessment, because
Yeah.
sometimes the options are not easy, and their own circumstances. Every person's different, and we have so many options. You can only learn about it by getting all the facts on the table. So for that kind of a consultation, we recommend, yeah, absolutely. This is now an assessment, not it's not a consultation for $200. This is an assessment, so you should charge like $1,000 for it, or 1,500, whichever you think the client could do, and then you credit that towards whatever work you're going to do for them later. But it could turn out there is no work, there is no way. Okay. I
Yeah.
just had a young lady call me, and one of my old clients referred this young lady and said, it's the best person I know. She's would be a real credit to Canada, And so I started discussing, and it turns out this young lady was on a study permit, couldn't afford to keep studying, left school a year and a half ago, and then 6 months ago applied for a work permit for which he wasn't qualified,
Hmm.
and now gets a letter saying you got to leave Canada, and says,
Hmm.
what do I do? Okay. Well, that's an assessment. Okay. And it takes, because I'm doing this as a favor to an old client. I don't charge for this, but I recommend this is the kind of person you'd say, okay, we'll go over everything with you. Okay. There might be something, maybe she's married to a Canadian and doesn't understand her rights. Clearly, she doesn't understand enough about immigration, because
Yeah.
she left studying and thought her study permit was still valid, so she thought she can stay in Canada.
Yeah.
She's
Yeah.
now worked illegally and overstayed. This person has no hope to come back to Canada except as a PR, unless she
Hmm.
happened to have been married or has been living with her boyfriend for, a year and a half and didn't think, but it's not marriage, right?
Hmm.
So anyway, all of these things come back together. So the idea in business immigration is to first of all get the questionnaire done so that you know if these people have money.
Mhm.
Every business immigration
What do
program.
you have like threshold? Just generally, I know
Absolutely.
there are 25 programs, but
Well, you go to the regulations, and it says that a business endeavor in Canada, in almost all cases, should be substantial. Okay, and people say, well, what does that mean in terms of money? And IRCC does not tell you, except the provinces tell you it's got to be $200,000 or $400,000. IRC doesn't tell you that for a C10 or an ICT or anything like that. So we always tell people that what you need to do is go with what would a visa officer consider to be substantial. And the rule of thumb is anything that's twice what they get paid in a year. Okay, so visa officers make around 100,000 a year. So don't come to us with a
that
business.
is a really funny answer. I
Yeah, but it works because the visa
yeah.
officer sitting there and says this guy invested $20,000
Yep.
and bought a business. You know, well, the history of immigration, passive immigration. We know that very wealthy people will spend $300,000, just to get here. So you got to make sure that the money is substantial. And in some applications, like a treaty investor, substantial means $200,000 to $300,000 investment. Now,
Hmm.
the form of that investment doesn't have to be cash up front. If you're going
Hmm.
to do a C10, that's a program that says you're going to provide the significant benefit. What they want to see is that you have the money to invest to create the significant
Yeah.
benefit, and that you've taken substantial concrete steps to get there, but you don't have to have spent all the money. Okay. On the other hand, if you're going to buy a business, and do an owner operator LMIA, for example, and the business could be $500,000, but you don't have a half a million, well, they'll accept the fact that you put in $50,000 as a down payment, and you have a mortgage, if you will, with the seller to pay the rest, because that's a legal obligation, and they'll
Hmm.
count that as $500,000. So there's lots of different mechanisms you can use to qualify the individual. But first and foremost, you have to get that questionnaire so you understand what their backgrounds are. Then you have to explain to them that, okay, we need two things from you. We need to know, where do you want to live? Because Canada's a really big country. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's not the case where people come and say, oh, you're a Canadian, you live in Toronto, my friend lives in Winnipeg, maybe you know the only people that doesn't work with, I talked with some Russians the other day, and they said, yes, we understand that question very well. Okay, big country. um, and we need to know what kind of business. And people say, I've had people say, just find us any business that makes money. Well, thank you very much. Okay, first of all, you can't do that because we can't tell you you're going to make money, and we can't
Exactly.
I can't offer you my brother-in-law's business, because it's a good business, and so as advice, don't ever suggest to the client which business they should get in.
Yeah.
Have them come and work with professionals who know how to do that, but professionals who find businesses are all local. So don't, we have some great people who can find businesses in Toronto, but if you want to go to Vancouver, they can't help you. So
Yeah.
so we need to know, where do you want to live and what do you want to do? And sometimes clients are a little resistant, and they continually ask, well, is this business the right one? Well, we have to be able to tell them that, no, no, our job is to tell you whether what you want to do with this business is going to qualify for an immigration program, not it's the right business. Okay.
Hmm.
I mean, because, if they can come to Canada, it could be the right business. And if you tell them it's a good business and they come here and they work at
Yeah.
it, and after 3 years they lose all their money, they're going to come back to you with a
Yeah.
lawyer who says you advised them wrongly. Okay. So
Exactly. Yeah.
again, with business immigration, the other skill that people need to have is they need to know how to do everything else in terms of the regular types of applications. They need to know how to do TRVs. They need to know about admissibility. They need to know study permits. They need to know how to do work permits. You know, they need
Yeah.
to know how to do all those things, because even though the client will hire you for your understanding of the business process, um, if you're working on it and they come back to you and say, oh, I have a 14-year-old,
Yeah.
where can he get a study permit? And you have to then go, I'll check on that because I've never done study permits. Okay.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
lose faith in you. Okay.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
since
No, It all makes sense. But for business immigration, other like obviously if you're going through the PNP pathway, that would be just a regular, pathway to PR. But if you're going with the C10s or any federal pathways, what would be the final destination for PR?
So for everyone, it's now a two-step process, practically speaking. That even if you go to a PNP program, you're just going to get a work permit. And you're going to
Yeah.
get a work permit with conditions that you have to meet over a couple of years. And you're going to
Hmm.
have to deal with other issues. There is no such thing as a simple PNP program.
Yeah.
First and foremost, what you have to accept is the programs change. You could have been talking over the last 5 years to people about Ontario entrepreneur programs, and some of them start the program and want to get in the program. Well, there is no program anymore.
Yeah.
You could start a program. I mean, for the Yukon, they've just canceled their program. With the biggest problem with PNP programs right now is because the PNP allocations for PR were cut by what 55% in November.
Yeah.
They're just now getting their quotas or their allocations, and they're saying which of their programs they want to keep and how many. And what we're seeing are things like Alberta, which has 3,000 nominations, not 7 or 8 that they wanted, has 3,000 nominations. They already have a 20,000 people waiting list.
Hmm.
And within that program, they have a small business entrepreneur program, the Rural Alberta program, and they expect to do 4 of them this year.
Wow.
Well, I can guarantee you in the 23,000, there's more than 4 of those applications in. So PNPs have become very difficult. And up until in the last month or so, we've been telling people, don't even try. Don't tell anyone about a PNP program because we don't know what they're going to be.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
just finding out this month that some of them are coming online and maybe there's going to be some room. But I can promise you that if you're working in Ontario and you have a client and you think the Saskatchewan PNP is going to be good for them, all of the consultants who work in Saskatchewan already know all about that program and already have lined up all of the spots for the next few years.
Yeah.
This local people have the best advantage when you're dealing with a provincial program.
Hmm.
And that goes all across the country. There are consultants. I saw a publication from one of them yesterday. The only file this guy does are Nova Scotia PNBs. That's all. Okay. Now, and the complaint is that now their numbers are so reduced, he's going to have to branch out. Okay. Well, if the local people have already sold out the program for the next few years, that's that's the kind of thing we can help with because we try to keep our ear to the ground. Now, federal programs are without exception, there's no quota on any of them.
Yeah.
Number one. Number two, half of the programs or more are treaty programs. What does that mean? It means they can't change. ICTs have been around for 70 years. Okay. Yes, we have NAFTA and there's ICT under NAFTA, which is the same program. And we now have CETA and Trans-Pacific Partnerships, and we have about 35, most countries have treaties. They're all under R204. And
Hmm.
those rules, you may have noticed there were some changes in September in the ICT program, saying you needed to have two businesses outside of Canada before you could open up a new one here.
Yeah. Yeah.
That did not apply to all the treaty countries at all.
Hmm.
Okay, and we've now learned it doesn't apply to renewals. So if there was a large
Oh
Brazilian
wow, I
company
didn't
with
know
business
that.
in Canada, it doesn't apply to them, and it only applies to a new company if you're setting up a brand new company in Canada. So
Hmm.
even someone from Nigeria who wants to set up an ICT, they've got a big business in Nigeria, typically 100 employees. I mean, no, sorry, $1 million in sales and 20 to 40 employees. That's the kind of business that will qualify for an ICT without issues. They can actually come to Canada, set up their company in Canada, have someone start the business, like a partner here, hire a Canadian, get the business up and running, and have it running for 6 months. Then they can do an ICT because an operating Canadian company counts as one of two.
Hmm.
Okay, it doesn't have to be two countries outside. And there is another special thing we can do is even if the Nigerian company wants to send in the owner of the business who owns the Canadian company to get it started, now we can use C11. C11 is
Hmm.
for entrepreneurs, self-employed people, and it's short term. You can't get C11s, and you should never ask for them for a 1 year application. So you say,
Mhm.
look, our person needs to come in 6 months, wants to set up the business, get it operating, and then is going back to their home country. Of
Yeah.
course, once it's up and running for 6 months and you've got sales and clients and an active business, now they can file for an ICT.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay.
Without, so we're learning how to work within those parameters.
Yeah.
Every one of them, we've now lost the ability for people who are not visa exempt to go to the border, but people who are visa exempt can still flagpole,
Yeah.
right? They all can because they're allowed as visa exempt people. Most of the business immigration, you're applying for a CEO or CFO or operating officer. Most of them can also have their spouses get work permits, not because they're on the list of ICT, that IRCC just put out, but because it's a reciprocal agreement, and those
Hmm.
countries offer the same to spouses from Canada when they go if they get transferred
Yeah.
there. And the only country I know of that's an exception is Vietnam. If you do a treaty investor from Vietnam, and the husband comes to run the business here, his wife does not get an open work permit because Vietnam
That's
does not have
very
the
odd.
same rule. Yeah, it's just one of those tweaks, if you
Yeah.
will.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
so business immigration has lots of rules. They change. The
Yeah.
most important part is that if you want to do this, um, is that you qualify the people properly at the start. That you don't take
Yeah.
marginal cases. Okay. And
Exactly. So I think of those folks, it's just because I get asked this all the time about business immigration because there are RCICs who really are in those markets that, have that access to, for example, Dubai. A lot of people, residents of Dubai, they are already opened up businesses and they're making money, they have the net worth, they have
yep,
everything that it takes. So they're already kind of like mentally used to this process and they're looking into coming to Canada now. And a lot of our CSCs ask me this question. So what I'm getting from all of this is that really the key element would be to make sure that the person has, say, 200,000 and up to invest in the business. And second is just fill up that questionnaire and just properly qualify that person. And then as long as that process is done, then co-counseling from IMMC3 can be really done. And you don't really need to worry about being on your own with this because it's a
for
lot of
sure.
pressure when you're working with those people who put a lot of money on the line, right? It's a lot of pressure on RCIC to really, it's stressful to really like know what they're talking about. And there's so many navigations between all of these treaties and agreements and all of these possibilities. And you constantly think, okay, did I not forget about anything, right? So having that
Yeah,
support,
yeah,
yeah,
that's
it's
that's one of the key elements that you know that you haven't made a mistake. Okay. Now, I'm not going to tell you that you're going to get away with no stress because I don't care if you're filing a study permit or a TRV, you know, you want your client to get what they paid you to do.
yeah,
And IRCC is so inconsistent in their decisions, you always have to be thinking, well, perfect file, but it gets refused, because Chinook made a mistake or because the
yeah,
officer didn't read it or,
yeah,
get all of those things. So the good part about co-counseling is we have like a network and we're all talking to each other and we're looking at
hmm,
all the files and we're finding out what kind of decisions. Like right now, the latest is LMIAs are taking a year and a half almost. I mean, they're
yeah.
taking way too long.
Well, I
And
just got decision on LMIA that I filed in January 2024, and it was like the most odd decision I've ever had because I filed it January 2024, and literally it was quiet for the whole year. I haven't heard a peep, nothing. And then last week it was just update of a status, decision rendered, and I'm like, okay, but I couldn't see what the decision. I'm like, oh, it's refused for sure, because I'm like, they didn't ask anything, like it's for sure refused. And then next day it's like approved, and I'm like, I don't know what is going on anymore because it's been 1 year. Like
yeah,
it's just so
and
odd.
it's not an accident.
Yeah.
Ever since those files, especially the ones filed last year in January, February, March, April, those files once ESDC knew that there were changes coming, and the rules changed big time in October, but they were talked about long before. They just put a lot of files on hold. and nothing happened because the demand
Yeah.
did not go up. It started going down, okay, somewhat because of the economy. The unemployment went up and the demand went down, and ESDC put those files on hold when they shouldn't.
Mhm.
We are also seeing in several of their decisions and requests for more information that someone has sent out the memo saying, get really tough on these. Okay. So we've been through this before. I've actually had
Yep.
ESCC officers tell me back in 2014 when they changed the whole program and said, look, we've been told to refuse every file that we can,
Yep.
which is completely unfair. But the other thing now you only have to worry about, just so you know, is we just had a rep call us and say, hey, I need help with this. The LMIA was approved. Um, we filed the work permit last February. And no, they filed the LMIA, they filed the work permit application. The work permit now has been in process they had an approved LMIA they filed in February, okay, for the work permit. Work permit's been in process for 11 months, and they just got a note saying, okay, we're ready to process your work permit. Please, the LMIA expired in November. Go get a new LMIA.
What?
Yeah, and it's a low-skilled one where it's now impossible to get another
Yeah.
LMIA. But that's what IRCC came back with. So we have gone back
Wow.
to IRCC and said, well, I have to tell you, we used a lot of legal language, okay, which effectively turned into, I mean, is telling the visa officer, in a whole bunch of four-letter words, that you are wrong, you can't do this, you're not allowed to do this. Here, the court precedent. I mean, we've gone back to them on a, theirs was like a PFL, request for evidence, and so we've
Wow.
sent them information saying you can't ask this. The law says the LMIA must be in effect at the time your work permit application is evaluated. It was. It's a valid application. It's a valid work permit application. You took 11 months to process it, so you can't ask us for something new. And I think this is a visa officer just messing up. So,
Yeah.
but if you can imagine, if you're on your own, sitting there going, "What do I do? Who do I call?" Right? Well, we're not Ghostbusters, but you can call us. Okay. And I mean, in the letter that we drafted to say here's the response, um, we basically I indicated there that this is not just an error in fact in law. This is something called malfeasance and incompetence.
Hmm.
The rep called me back and said, "How can you use language like that?" And I said, "Because that's what it is, and we are allowed to do that because we're advocating for our clients." And we're alerting them to the intention that says there's going to be a federal court decision on this one that comes back. If you don't approve it, there's going to be a federal court case, and the judge is going to come back with some really nasty comments, which will go into your employment file. Okay,
Yeah.
you have to. I mean, many of the visa officers, they tell us that their job is there to approve files, not to refuse them. And by and
Hmm.
large, they're right because the vast majority of files get approved, but they occasionally go on, really weird trips. And
Well,
sometimes,
especially right now. Right now, we're seeing the rise of PFL letters. A lot of times, rightfully, because a lot of people are filing fraudulent work experiences from back home. That's
yep,
what is happening right now. But a lot of times, like I'm myself having in December, I think it was procedural fairness letter for a completely genuine, obviously file, and it's just because the trend they're trying to be more strict and just look closely into it, and of course the proper applications, genuine applications with all the proof in the world going there as well. So that leads me to my other question, and I wanted to ask you this. Obviously our business changed, and just the scene of immigration consultants business changed from 1990s and 2000s, right?
oh yeah,
Now we have how many? 11,000, I believe, immigration consultants.
yep,
And when I started 2016. I think it was about maybe 3 or 4 thousand.
yep,
So that is really, really different. So there is more competition, but at the same time, there are more immigrants and more people. I'm sure that the quotas that you remember in 2006 immigration level plan didn't look anything like it looks right now. So people are complaining that 395,000 is not enough, or like for our businesses. But I'm sure that in 2006 or whatever, it was probably what, like 100,000 or
Yeah,
150?
well, it's more than that. It's the streams. Back in when ERPA came in 2002, um, there was a skilled worker stream,
Yeah.
okay, which initially was 75 points, but nobody could reach it, so they dropped it to 67 the next year. There
Hmm.
was a family class, spouses and parents and grandparents, um, and that was it. There were no PNPs. There were very few temporary foreign workers. There were very
Hmm.
few students. So as a result of all of that, your practice was based on PR, and many consultants had to travel overseas to get clients. Okay,
Yeah.
that's how they got clients, and there were not many refugees in those days either. Okay, since then, it's an absolute explosion. Um, I used to think back in 2008 and 9 when we were working together, I would get calls from people. I never ever got a call from someone who said, "Well, I'm talking with another consultant." Okay, never, not once. So I realized we're not competitors.
Yeah.
Okay, the only time I might get a call is from someone who said, "Well, I talked to a lawyer and I paid him $200 and he told me nothing." And I thought, "Well, thank you, lawyers. I'm free." Okay, I'm not only do I not charge you, I'm much easier to talk to and much
Yeah.
friendlier. Okay, so I've never had to worry about it. Sometimes they would have talked to lawyers. It's exactly the same today. I mean, I deal with a lot of people now, with a lot through the other the councils I'm working with, and none of the clients ever talk about other consultants. They talk about things they've heard in the business about
Yeah.
online, things like that. And I do hear from people that, well, I guess maybe because of what we do, we hear from people whose initial consultant didn't do a good job, or initial lawyer didn't do a good job. We get lots of those too, but I just never hear. So I'm still of the opinion that we don't have any competition. And if you look at the lines of business, and okay, 385,000 PRs. How many PRs were admitted in 2018? 275,000.
Yeah.
So since 2018 to 385,000 this year, that's a big jump. Okay.
I actually posted it on LinkedIn because I was like, okay, I started practicing in 2016. So I went back and looked at the 2016, 17,
Yeah.
18, and the numbers were, yeah, like high 200s. So right now is much more than
Oh, yeah.
before COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And look what the rest of what the cutback in the quotas has now done. We are now getting people are just absolutely swamped with agency applications. They're
Yeah.
swamped with refugee applications. They are swamped with restorations.
Yeah.
IRCC did something incredibly stupid, but I think they did it on purpose, and that was people who are coming to the end of their postgrad work permit,
Mhm.
would think they could file for a work permit to renew them or extend them because it was
Mhm.
such desperate situations. And maybe during COVID, there was an extension allowed. So people started filing extensions to postgrad work permits, which were not allowed. And
Mhm.
we were seeing lawyers give that advice, members of parliament saying you should file again because then you'll be in maintained status. And we would tell people, look, if you file a bogus application when you're not eligible for, and it takes more than 90 days to process, you're going to get a letter that says you're not eligible for restoration. You got to leave the country now, right? Well, what does IRCC do? When people are filing these bogus applications to extend their postgrad work permits, they get a letter within a week saying you are now in maintained status and you can continue working,
Yeah. Yeah.
which means now when they get a decision with refusal, they are eligible for restoration.
Yeah.
Well, those people who've been having work permits expire more and more are now ending up in asking for restoration. Well, how do you file for restoration? You need help. Okay. And when your restoration gets refused, now what are you going to do? You know, people, there's massive increases in restoration applications, TRP applications. People assume that when their status expires because they forgot to renew it and they can't restore, that they can file a TRP. And yes, you can file a TRP, but you have no right to stay in Canada and your TRP is going to be refused. So,
Yep.
there's a massive business now in helping these extra million people who don't want to leave stay a little longer. And
Yep.
I'm expecting over the next few months, we know that the tide is now turning. Okay, we've seen that the cutback on study permits has exceeded its expectations, and it's hurting. When we're not
Hmm.
getting master's students and PhD students to the numbers we need, that's a real problem, and they're going to have to do something about that. The just today the unemployment rate went down, and it
Yep.
went down for full-time work in many areas of the country, and people are complaining now already for the last few months they can't find enough employers, and everybody's saying, well, wait a minute, we had too many TFWs before. Well, look what's happened. Now you can't get open work permits for spouses. Okay, and the whole industry in several of the industries, they cannot find enough workers, and the reason they can't find enough workers is because of people like me. Is because I'm a baby boomer, okay? And people are leaving the workforce in numbers like we have never seen before, and that's going to keep going for the next 5 years. People don't understand how boomers affect. I can give you an example. I was born in 1949. Okay, boomers started in 47, basically, when the soldiers
Hmm.
all came home from the war and everybody, the economy picked up, so everybody started having lots of kids, and I'm an early boomer. Okay, when I was finishing high school in the late 60s, my high school had 90 grade 12s. Okay. There were
Oh my gosh.
180 grade 11s.
What?
There were
Where was it
four.
in Burlington?
No, I was in Saskatoon. Okay. Out in,
Oh, okay. I
no,
didn't
this
know that.
small school, we had just started. It was a new school, but we had 90 grade 12s. We had
Wow.
180 grade 11s. We had 360 grade 10s and 500 grade 9s. And that's
That's
because
crazy.
so many people were the children of the boomers. Well, the boomers when they were children. Well, that same thing is happening now. I mean, I am now considerably older than 65. All right, if you tell from 70, from 49 to 7, okay, it's 29. Okay, something like that. But behind me are so many more people retiring, and guess what? Those people are not all university graduates. Those
Yeah.
are people who are working and have worked their entire lives in the service industries.
Yeah.
They've raised their families. They've done all of everything that any other generation will do. There's just so many of them. And at the flip side, the bottom, the generation of people who are coming of working age, we know how many there are because you don't get born at 18 years of age, so it doesn't matter how many people are under 18. We know how many are 18, and the next 5 years, they're just half. It's half as many of 10 million people, and those jobs are just being vacant. So we need more
Yeah.
people. And that sort of story is going to start having more and more effect over the next 6 months, especially as we've cut back on the number of temporary residents. And stories in the paper are going to be about our population is declining. It's
Hmm.
expected to go down this year. And correspondingly, our GDP per person is going to go up. So everybody's
Hmm.
been complaining about that for not the right reasons. Is going to say,
Yep.
yeah, but, all right. So anyway, just a pet peeve of mine that you got to understand the whole picture. So
Yes,
I
exactly.
think as a profession, we're going to see a big demand shortly in work permits. Okay. And unfortunately, IRCC and ESDC are slow to react to change. And especially, they need guidance and direction from the politicians. And right now, the politicians can't tell them to get more people here because
Yep.
that's politically dangerous after what we went through in the last year.
Yep.
Okay, but
Yeah.
once that settled down, everything changes. In the next 6 months, by the time summer's here, we're going to expect that there's going to be a very robust market for employers hiring temporary foreign workers. And right now, the rules are harder than ever. So
Yeah.
what does that mean? More work for us. The
Yeah.
same with all the up now. We still got all those extra, and I believe we're going to start seeing ways for those million or so temporary residents to start filling the void. Because what do you do if your postgrad work permit expires and you don't get an LMIA and you can stay around another 3 or 6 months with various legal tricks? Then what do you do?
Yep.
Can't work, and you can work illegally, right? But even they're getting tougher and tougher on that with employers, so the government's going to have to come along with programs that said, just like the temporary to permanent foreign work, when they did that program,
Yep.
it's just that they're not going to do this for permanent immigration. My
Hmm.
expectation is they're going to start, and what we've recommended, and send in your ideas to CAPIC. That CAPIC's the one voice. I don't need me to do a CAPIC commercial, but if you have great ideas on how to improve the immigration system and you send them into immigration, they'll never get looked at. Okay,
Hmm.
but there is a voice for consultants, and if you think there's better ways to change it, we've suggested that, look, anybody who's in Canada should be getting additional express entry points for the years they work in Canada.
Yep.
Change the matrix around to if you're going to take away the employment points for 50 and 200 points, right, which may or may not happen, then give people, everybody, and give business people points for the years they operate their business in Canada. So, if you're going to have a whole hotel housekeeper, who only has a high school education and basic English, well, give them an extra 25 points for every year they work in Canada. So after 4 or 5 years, they can become eligible for PR. But they're here legally. They're filling jobs that need to be filled,
Yep.
right? I think,
Yep.
I hope they're going to do that, because the problem is that they're not business friendly people in the immigration department.
Hmm.
They're very sensitive to things like uh, um, refugees.
Hmm.
So
Yes.
they're trying to find ways to reduce the refugee backlog by
Yep.
allowing and finding new ways for those people to work and live in Canada. Um, but there could be big changes there too. If
Yep.
I mean, if the Ukraine war was finalized one way or another, then massive numbers of people will go back.
Yes, that's
Um,
true. Ukrainians will go back
yeah,
100%. So many Ukrainian people are here,
yeah.
and they honestly, like, as much as they appreciate Canada, but a lot of them don't want to be here. Like, they want to
Right.
go
Want to go
back.
back.
And if tomorrow the war is over, it would be a huge
Well, it's because a
outflow.
whole lot of them are staying here because they don't want 18-year-olds to 25-year-olds now that are going to be
Exactly.
drafted. They don't want to go into military service. So
Yeah.
they're staying here for that reason. Well, if the war is over, that reason goes away, and people will
Yeah.
go back. And there's always crises around the world, but
Yeah.
we have to see what's going to happen. So
Yeah.
I'm very optimistic, but I'm an optimistic person by nature, um, and it's just that the facts of the case. When you get past
Yep.
the optimism and look at the facts, yes, there's a reduction in PR targets. You know, okay, it's been done, but it's still way more than we used to take. Yes, the number of students is way down. Well, the government's going to have to turn around and issue more study permits. Okay. Um, yes, there's a reduction, or it's harder to get workers here. That's going to change because it has to. Okay.
Yep.
So um, we, if you get good ideas, send them into CAPIC and say, here, I want these think about this policy. Here's what I
Yep.
know, right?
Yep.
And hopefully we'll help the department as we have in the past. They've accepted many ideas that CAPIC's proposed on how to change programs. That's why it's great to have a good relationship with the department, and then politically talk to your members of parliament, okay, and say, look, my employers can't find workers, you know,
Yep.
and you can say to them, I know that you can't say before the election that you're going to do something about it because you'll just lose votes, you know, uh,
Yep.
but this is the reality. Okay.
Yep.
And
For sure.
if there's a new conservative government, they're going to have to live with that reality too. They're going to
Hmm.
have the business community down their back saying,
Yep.
what do you mean we can't operate? Okay.
Yep.
And so they'll have to be doing some things like this. Okay.
Yep.
Immigration
Well,
as a political issue is almost never one that they want to talk about during an election, because
yes.
all you do is if you're pro more immigration, you just harden the people who hate immigration to vote against you. If you're you know against immigration, well, if you come out and speak, then you're anti-Canadian, and the people who believe in immigration generally, and
Hmm.
everybody agrees that what happened in the past is just mismanagement. Okay, well, that's fine. We still need the program. Okay.
For sure. Well, the way I see just all these effects in everyday life of immigration consultants is that, like in our practice, I see that cases are becoming more complicated for sure.
Yep.
Because if 1 year, 2 years ago, PRs were approved left and right. Right now, we're seeing requests. Like one of our cases has already 4 requests on that case, and we did it no different than we did those case. We would have done that case 3 years ago, but it's just because it's changing. So now we have more complicated cases in our hands. We have people who need TRPs, restorations, as you said. So the level of competence needed to perform this job, I feel like the requirement is higher. So if previously RCICs who are fairly fresh to the profession, they were feeling comfortable just because it was just easier to file those cases and get favorable decisions. Now it's getting harder. You need higher level of professionalism and competence to deal, because the cases that come to you are already, harder, right? They already are more
Yeah.
problematic. There are no more straightforward cases there left. So I think that's why the need for, those co-counseling, accessible co-counseling and easy co-counseling services, the need is the higher than ever.
Yeah, and we think that's the case too. And just, I mean, nowadays you have to prepare a case as if it's going to be refused, and you have to include things that if this does go to federal court, the case that you've submitted has a much better chance of winning in federal court.
Yes.
And when people realize is it's not good enough just to put in all of the requirements and say you've met them. You have to actually refer what you're doing to case studies and to the
Yep.
law. If you don't do that, when a judge looks at it, you can say, well, you didn't reference, R200, or you didn't reference R186, or you didn't reference these particular provisions, so I can't consider them. All right. So, I mean, I used to never put case precedents or refer to the law in any application we filed. You know,
Yep.
I remember I had the opportunity to be an instructor at Seneca College, and the topic I had was temporary residence, right? And the students were all there, and I started with how to do the form,
Hmm.
what to put in a form, right? And I had a couple students say, "Why are you telling us this? We don't care about forms. We want to know about the legal precedent for what happens with this and what happens with that." And I said, "Listen, if you have to quote legal precedents when you're applying for a visitor permit, you've lost already."
Yep.
Right? At the same time, the form is the window to the act. And
Hmm.
actually, how you put in the address has a reference in the act. And
Hmm.
so that's why you do forms. Okay. And typically with students, they argued even more. But that's okay. We got through it. The fact that Seneca closed down their program right after I finished was purely coincidence. Okay. It's actually a fact, but it wasn't my fault. um, but that's nowadays, you have to put these things in. You
Yep.
have to state, okay, my applicant, he's filing an application for a work permit. Okay, under which regulation? What are the
Yep.
reasons that he qualifies? What are the regulations? How does he meet each of these regulations? You know,
Yep.
and do you have a case precedent to support it? And bang. Um,
The way we process cases in 2025 is definitely changing comparing to the way that we process cases in 2023 and even 2024. Like right now, like we do a lot of spousal sponsorships. The way that we process spousal sponsorships completely changes, and that's the what immigrants don't understand. The fact that your friend got a PR in 2021 is great, but that's not the case in 2025. And
that's right.
what was overlooked in 2021 or 2022 and 2025 is going to be enforced, and people not mentioning previous work experiences in their previous applications for study or work permit. Now it's a big issue. So that things are changing, and the way that we process, as you said, cases changing, quoting those legal precedent changes. So just as a final note, what would be your biggest advice to RCICs that are watching with just all of your experience and everything? What's your biggest advice?
Well, the hardest thing to do in your practice is to get business. Okay. And it's not a question of getting inquiries, it's a question of how you process them. Okay. Because if you if you don't do a thorough job, because initially you're just so happy to get a client, all right?
Yeah.
And if you don't have enough clients, get busy. Don't sit in your office and read the rules and the act and the regulations. Don't watch videos. Get out into the community. Go to refugee or to community groups. You know,
Yep.
do things. Research online what works for people, what doesn't. I've heard three or four, even in the last 6 months, how successful consultants are doing business now online. Some of them on Snapchat. Some of them on things I don't even know how to do. They're doing all of these things. Okay, and the idea is to build up a volume until you get lots of referrals. Then once you're in that position, if you're already in the position and you're trying to think, do I have to hire people? Absolutely hire people who can grow, free up your time to do the parts of this practice that you like. Okay. But keep doing things. All right. Don't get so buried in the day to day, that you can't look up and say, what direction am I going? Right.
Yeah.
It's like, swimming in the ocean thinking, oh, this is nice and soft. And then you go, sharks? What sharks? Okay. You have to be looking ahead and planning ahead.
Yeah.
And we all operate businesses, and businesses need plans, and plans need to be thoughtful, and they need to be checked on and need to be policed. You'll learn business management skills in here. If you don't know them, take a course. If you don't know how to sell, take a course. But
Yeah.
the main thing is stay busy in your practice until you get to the point where you can start to pick and choose your clients, and be sure you're charging enough money. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sure that you have to do more for your clients than you did in 2016. The question is, are you
Yeah.
charging enough? All right. And if you think people are going to resist what you charge, learn how to negotiate. Okay. I've
Yeah.
lots of times clients have called me and said, I said, here, this is the price. And they would say, okay, well, can you do better? Okay. Well, it's surprising how many people can't answer that question. They're not asking for a lower price. They're asking you to justify the price you're charging.
Exactly. Yeah.
But how you justify it, I would say to them, yeah, this is the fee for our services. Um, if you if I have to go and justify the price, I'm going to have to charge you more. Okay, because it's taking my time, right? So I can always go higher, and they all laugh. Everybody laughs, but then they
Yeah.
never ask again. Okay. But
Yeah.
just learn how to deal with people in those kinds of situations so you get your fair pay. And people say, I mean, I've talked to people about how much money should I make? Well, virtually all of the people out there, except me, had to have a degree to get into the program, have a second now credential, whether you're an RCIC or you graduated from Queens, et cetera, you still have that additional credential, years of experience. You have to be making $100,000 a year, which means your practice has to be doing at least $200,000 a year,
Yeah.
and with an upward trend. um, to do that, you have to charge enough. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I have lots of last minute advice because there's no one thing that does it. Keep learning,
Exactly.
meet with other consultants. This is a lonely business, right? Because
Hmm.
we all work alone in our offices, right? Pretty well most of the time. If we go to a party and somebody says, what do you do? And you say, oh, I'm an immigration consultant. Well, they think you bring in people on rusty boats and abandon them on the shore. And you can't talk to them about your cases anyway because it's all confidential. If you go home and talk to your spouse and family members, they don't want to hear that because that's what's keeping you away from them. So it's a kind of a lonely business. And the only time you really get to share is when you go out and meet other consultants or you go online. Even online isn't as good. But if you're going to go to a CPD seminar that's local, go in person. Don't be online because you might get, if it's a Cape when you get a good lunch and you'll get to talk to people and you get to talk to other people who share your concerns and you can actually describe your problems to them. And again, we aren't competitors. I've
Yeah.
learned more from my fellow consultants than I could ever give back. Okay.
I
Um,
totally agree with that. And attending in-person events is just so important. I don't know if you're going to a CAPIC conference in May,
yeah,
but
yeah,
I'm very looking forward to that one because I had really good time in Halifax and just connecting with people in person,
yeah,
in this day and age is just so invaluable because we spent all our times with our phones and computers,
Yeah.
and just having that in-person connection and learning from those business owners, it's so invaluable. It's
Yeah.
better than any business course.
Yeah. And it's money, but you're investing in yourself and your company. Okay, that's
Yeah.
the key. And there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with getting away and meeting other people. I mean, some of the people I deal with now are people I've known for 20 years, 25 years. And it all resulted from going to that first Capic luncheon. I thought the food was good and the meeting was handled badly, but then that ended up in me volunteering for 5 years with no compensation, you know. But I wouldn't regret it. I wouldn't change a
Yeah.
thing about it. And you meet some really, really good people who share your interests, and
Yeah.
that's been the best part of it. So it's a profession. This is not a job. We are regulated. We're in a profession, and we are so lucky. I worked in the corporate world. I worked for a big chemical company, and we helped dairies and restaurants, hotels clean all their equipment. So I was doing something good, right?
Yeah.
But then when I got into this business, and when you help people achieve their dreams, they are so happy. And I still to this day, when somebody calls me and said, "Hey, that file we submitted, we just got an approval," it's a rush. It's
Yes, it is. It is a
I don't do
rush.
drugs, but I'm sure it's not as good. It's better than that. Okay.
You know what? In November, I went to Vegas. So now everything I compare to Vegas, and it really is like that. Like when you get that retainer and then you do the case and then you get an approval. It is that rush, definitely.
Yeah, and the
Yeah.
better part about it is it's a good one. Okay, it's
Yeah.
not you win at the casino. You're going to give it back. Okay. The
Yeah.
other one is that you're also helping build Canada. You're helping the
Exactly.
right people that we need. I trust in the vision of the overall immigration mission. To bring in people who are family or to help our economy grow. We're helping build Canada. Now, how many jobs out there can you say that about? So
Yeah,
we're really privileged to work in this environment and to work in these kinds of jobs. So, it is a serious business, that we want to all become more professional,
yeah,
and we can learn that from each other. All right.
for
And that's,
sure.
that's again what co-counseling is about. Okay.
Yep, exactly. All right. Well, thank you so much, Phil, for today. The link to IMMC3 is down below in the description of this video. So if you want to apply to get those questionnaires to start, with your prospect, if you have a client that you want to help, but you don't exactly know how, then please go to the website and apply to be a part of IMMC3 and
Nope,
get
it
that
doesn't
support.
cost anything. Yeah. The good
Doesn't
part is
cost anything.
it's free. Just have a prospect. Okay. That's the first
Yep.
place. All
Yeah,
right.
you need to have a real client. You need to have a real client to do that. All right. Well, thank you so much for today. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Elena. Take care. Best of luck.
Thank you.